The folder was already on the kitchen counter when I came in from the garden. And my daughter-in-law was watching me from across the room, the way you watch someone when you've been rehearsing what to say. "We've been thinking," she said, "and we believe it might be time to talk about your options." I set my gardening gloves on the hook by the door. "My options for what?" She tilted her head. That small, patient tilt I'd been watching for months. "For going forward. For you." She pushed the folder toward me across the counter. "We found a few places we think you'd really love." The folder was pale blue. Inside were printouts, glossy photographs of a senior living community 40 minutes south, on a stretch of highway I'd driven 100 times without ever imagining I'd be handed a brochure for it. Heated pool, weekly yoga classes, a shuttle that took residents to the grocery store on Thursdays. "I drive myself to the grocery store," I said. "Of course you do," she smiled, "but this way, you'd have a whole community. People your own age. You'd never feel isolated." I was 63 years old. I had run an elementary school with 400 students for 19 years. I had written curriculum, managed staff, mediated parent conflicts that could strip the paint off a wall, and found the right words in rooms where there were no right words. And I was standing in my own kitchen being told I might feel isolated. "Where's my son?" I asked. She glanced toward the hallway. "He's on a call. He thought it might be easier if I started the conversation." There it was. He'd sent her ahead, a scout with a folder. I picked up the folder, looked at the first page, and set it back down. "I'll think about it," I said. "The way you say something when you have absolutely no intention of acting on it." She nodded as if I'd agreed to everything. "That's all we're asking." I should explain the house, because it's at the center of everything. I bought it 28 years ago, 3 months after my husband died, when my son was 11, and I needed something that couldn't leave. 4 bedrooms, corner lot, decent school district, a backyard with room for a garden, and for a few years, a tire swing. I paid the mortgage myself every month on a principal's salary, refinanced once to replace the roof. Installed the oak floors in the living room over 2 weekends with tutorials on YouTube, and a rental sander I returned with sawdust still in my hair. Every wall color chosen, every fixture researched. The deed had my name on it and only my name, and I had paid for that right one mortgage statement at a time for 22 years until the house was mine free and clear. My son had moved back in the previous spring. He'd changed jobs, needed time to get stable, asked if he and his wife could stay for a few months. I said yes without hesitation. The house had been quieter than I liked since he'd left at 22, and I was glad for the company. 8 months later, his wife was handing me a brochure. The changes had started before the folder, before the conversation. Small things I'd noticed and let pass. She rearranged the pantry one afternoon without asking, and when I came to make dinner, my things were on the high shelves I needed a step stool to reach. She replaced the hand soap in the guest bathroom with something that smelled like eucalyptus and gave me a headache every time I passed. She brought home a new coffee maker, sleek, touchscreen, complicated, and put mine in the garage, telling me the old one had been making a grinding noise. It hadn't. I'd had it for 6 years and it ran perfectly. Then the photographs. I had a gallery wall in the hallway, frames I'd collected from antique shops and estate sales over 30 years. My son at various ages, from toothless at 4 to cap and gown at 22. My husband and me on our honeymoon in Savannah. My parents at their 50th anniversary. 3 generations on one wall. One morning I came downstairs and they were gone. In their place, a round mirror with a brushed brass frame and 2 botanical prints in matching matte black, the kind that come in sets. "The hallway was feeling dark," she said when I asked. "I thought it needed to breathe. Your photos are safe. I put them in the storage room." "I didn't ask you to change the hallway." "I know, I should have asked. I'm sorry." She touched my arm lightly. "I just want this to feel like a home for all of us." My son was standing in the doorway. He met my eyes, and then he looked at the floor. That evening I went to the storage room. My photographs were in a cardboard box face down. I want to be precise about why I didn't say more during those first months. Not because I missed what was happening. I'd spent almost 2 decades reading rooms, managing people, and recognizing when someone was running a strategy on me. What I also knew from long practice was that confronting someone before you have the full picture is how you hand them the advantage. Every move she made, I was watching. I was keeping a notebook in my desk drawer with dates and details. I was waiting for the thing I didn't yet have. It arrived in January, a piece of mail. I was usually the one who brought in the mail, habit, and because I liked the short walk to the box. But that morning, my sister had called and I'd stayed on the phone longer than planned, and when I finally got to the kitchen, a small stack of envelopes was already on the counter. My daughter-in-law was nearby, doing something at the sink, and she mentioned, without quite looking at me, that the mail had come while I was on the phone. There was a utility bill, a catalog, a thank you card from a former student, and then an envelope from a company called Meridian Settlement Services, with my name and address printed on the outside. She was watching me. Not obviously, she'd turned back to the sink, but I felt it. "Looked official," she said lightly. I didn't open it. "Thank you," I said. I took the envelope to my room and closed the door. It was a courtesy notification informing me that a preliminary title search had been initiated on my property as part of a cash purchase transaction. It included a transaction reference number and a phone number to call with questions. I hadn't initiated a transaction. I hadn't spoken to a title company or a real estate agent. I hadn't listed my home, signed any documents, or expressed an intention to sell to any living person. I read it 3 times. Then I sat on the edge of my bed for a while with the letter in my lap, listening to the ordinary sounds of my house. The furnace cycling on, my daughter-in-law's voice through the floor as she started a phone call downstairs. I didn't go back to the kitchen that evening. I said I had a headache, which was true in a particular sense, and I spent the night looking up Meridian Settlement Services and reading about a specific category of real estate fraud that targets homeowners with family members who have access to their identifying documents. It was more common than I'd known and more organized. The next morning, I drove to the drugstore 2 miles away and called my attorney from the parking lot. His name was Mr. Beckett, and I'd used him for my estate planning 5 years prior. He listened without interrupting. He told me to come in that afternoon. He confirmed after some calls that a cash buyer had made an offer on my property through a real estate wholesaler, not a licensed agent, but a middleman who connected investors with off-market properties. The listing described my home as an estate property, priced for a quick sale. It had been up for 6 weeks. "Have you signed anything recently?" Mr. Beckett asked. "Any document a family member might have put in front of you?" "No," I said. "Then what we likely have is someone in your household who accessed your deed, possibly from a filing cabinet or document storage, and has been misrepresenting ownership to a buyer. They haven't forged anything yet. The title search is the step that comes before the signature is required." He told me to secure the deed. I drove directly from his office to my bank and put the certified copy in my safe deposit box. Then I drove home and said nothing. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid closer attention than ever. I noticed the way she angled her laptop screen whenever I passed behind the couch. I noticed the evenings she stayed up after everyone else, her voice low and clipped in the living room, cutting off when I came downstairs for a glass of water. I noticed one afternoon when my son came home from work, looking distracted, and she pulled him into the bedroom for a long, quiet conversation, after which he came out and made himself a drink and didn't speak much at dinner. I also called my neighbor Darlene, who had lived 3 houses down for 30 years, and had a memory for neighborhood details that I'd always admired. "I did see it," Darlene told me quietly over the phone. "A listing, about 6 weeks back. I figured you'd decided to sell and just hadn't mentioned it yet. The description said estate property, motivated seller." Estate property. I was 63 and in excellent health. She gave me the name of the wholesaler whose contact information appeared on the listing. I passed it to Mr. Beckett. By the following week, he had a clearer picture. She had found the deed in my spare room filing cabinet and made a copy. She had been in contact with the wholesaler for nearly 2 months, describing the home as a family property that needed to be liquidated quickly. She had provided photographs, some of which I recognized as ones she'd taken during a period when she'd claimed she was documenting the house for insurance purposes. What she hadn't done yet was forge my signature. The title search was the step before that. Mr. Beckett said we had enough for a criminal complaint if I wanted to go that route immediately. He also said I had the right to handle it privately first. I chose privately, but not alone. I waited for Sunday. My son's college friend was coming for dinner, someone he'd known since freshman year, a good man who'd always been kind to me. My daughter-in-law had suggested the dinner herself, which I thought was interesting. She was comfortable in front of him. He was safe audience. I let her cook. She made roast chicken and a Caesar salad she was proud of, and she set the table with my good china, the set her own mother had admired on a visit, which she had gradually begun using as though it were hers. She'd bought a new centerpiece for the table, a low arrangement of white flowers in a clay pot that she'd placed where I had kept a wooden bowl my husband had made at a weekend carpentry class the year before our son was born. I'd moved that bowl to a shelf without saying anything. I noticed she hadn't noticed the bowl was gone. We sat down. The conversation was comfortable. My son's friend asking about the house, the neighborhood, how long I'd been there. Almost 30 years, I said. She's actually been considering a change, my daughter-in-law said, refilling her water glass without looking up. Simplifying her situation. Am I said. She laughed lightly. You know what I mean. My son looked at his plate. I reached into my bag. I'd kept it beside my chair throughout dinner, which she'd glanced at once and said nothing about, and I placed the letter from Meridian Settlement Services on the table in front of my son. He looked down at it. What's this? A courtesy notification from a title company, informing me that a preliminary title search has been initiated on my property as part of a cash purchase transaction. I kept my voice even and quiet. I didn't initiate any transaction. I didn't list this house, contact an agent, or sign a single document. And yet 6 weeks ago, a listing appeared online describing my home as an estate property available for quick sale. The table was very still. My son's friend set down his fork. I have no idea what you're talking about, my daughter-in-law said. I think you found the deed in the spare room filing cabinet and made a copy, I said. I think you've been in contact with a property wholesaler for the past 2 months. I think you described this house as a family estate and provided photographs you took here. I have documentation. My attorney has documentation. She said it was insane. She said I was twisting things. Her voice climbed and then caught itself and came back down, and I could see her deciding in real time to try composure instead. My son was looking at her, really looking, not at the table, not at me, at her. What did you do? He asked. Her posture changed. It wasn't like what she's making it sound. I was trying to find a solution for everyone. What did you do? His friend excused himself quietly and moved to the living room. She answered him, not fully, not honestly, but enough. The story that came out was partial and self-justifying. She'd thought the house would sell eventually anyway, thought it made sense to plan ahead, thought I would be better off in a smaller place, and this way there would be equity for them to buy something of their own. She said it like a reasonable person explaining a reasonable plan. She said it while my late husband's bowl sat on a shelf in the next room. My son listened until she finished. Then he was quiet for a long time. She's my mother, he said finally. This is her house. She left before dessert was served. The sounds from upstairs, drawers, hangers, a zipper, came down clearly through the ceiling. My son sat at the table for a long time after, his hands flat on the cloth, staring at the white flower arrangement. He didn't say much. I didn't push him. Eventually he said, "She told me you'd be happier somewhere smaller. She said you were lonely, that you'd thank us eventually." I thought about the pale blue folder, the heated pool, people your own age. "I'm not lonely," I said. "I've never been lonely in this house." He nodded slowly. I should have paid more attention to what was happening. "Yes," I said, "you should have." It wasn't the kind thing to say, but it was the true thing, and I'd raised him to prefer truth when it was available. He helped me clear the table. We washed the dishes side by side the way we had when he was a teenager, me washing, him drying, the two of us not talking much because we didn't need to. It was the most honest hour we'd spent together in 8 months. She left 2 days later with her sister's help. My son stayed another month, quieter than before, but present in a way he hadn't been. Making coffee in the mornings, sitting on the back porch in the evenings, fixing the guest bathroom faucet that had been dripping for a year. He apologized again, more than once. I told him once was sufficient and I meant it. The wholesaler withdrew his involvement once Mr. Beckett made the situation clear. A complaint was filed with the county DA's office. Her own attorney handled the rest, and where that ends up, I've made my peace with not controlling. What I controlled was the house. The week after she left, I went room by room and took it back slowly. I brought my photographs up from the storage box and rehung them in the hallway. My son at 6, at 12, at graduation. My husband and me in Savannah, squinting into the sun. My parents at 50 years. I straightened each frame with the small level I keep in the kitchen junk drawer. I found my coffee maker in the garage, wiped it down, and plugged it back in on the counter where it belonged. I moved my things back to the pantry shelves I could reach without help. I brought my husband's wooden bowl back to the center of the dining table. By the end of the week, the house smelled like itself, coffee and cedar, and when I opened the back door, the cold, dry air of a February afternoon settling over the garden where my roses were dormant but not finished. In March, I called a woman from my church named Beverly. She ran a housing assistance program, connecting women leaving difficult situations with short-term housing while they got stable. I told her I had a bedroom in good condition and I'd like to offer it. She asked if I was certain. I told her about the year I'd had, about what it felt like to have your own home used against you by someone who looked at the square footage and saw opportunity, about how displacement works on you even when you know you're standing on solid legal ground, how it makes you second-guess your own presence in rooms you've lived in for decades. What I know now that I maybe didn't know a year ago, I said, is that a home can hold someone or it can set them free, and which one it is depends entirely on who's controlling the key. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I have someone who needs exactly what you're describing. She arrived on a Thursday in late March, a woman in her early 40s carrying 2 bags and a child's backpack that belonged to her 8-year-old daughter, who held a stuffed rabbit against her chest the entire time we walked through the house. The girl was watchful in the way children are when they've had to be watchful for too long. I showed them the spare room, freshly painted, the quilt my mother had sewn spread across the bed. The little girl went immediately to the window and pressed her face against the glass to look out at the garden below. Are those rose bushes? She asked. They are. They'll bloom in May if we get enough warm days. Can I see them when they bloom? You'll be right here, I said. That first week they moved through the house quietly, careful and provisional the way people are when they don't yet believe a space is safe for them. By the second week, the girl had found the box of art supplies I keep in the hall closet and asked, with great seriousness, if she could use the colored pencils. Her mother made tea in the evenings and sometimes left a mug on the counter for me without being asked. One evening, I was reading in the living room when the girl came padding in, rabbit tucked under her arm. She didn't want anything in particular. She just stood at the edge of the rug looking at me until I moved my feet from the ottoman and she climbed up and sat beside me. We stayed like that for a while. Her with her rabbit, me with my book, the house quiet around us in the particular way it gets in the evenings when the furnace settles, and there's nothing outside but the sound of the neighborhood unwinding. I thought about what it means to own something. Not just hold the paper, but know a place the way you know it when you've lived in it long enough to understand how the afternoon light moves through the kitchen windows in July, or which stair creaks in cold weather, or how the garden smells after the first spring rain. I thought about how someone had looked at that knowledge, at 28 years of it, and decided it was transferable, that my home could be folded up and passed along without me. They were wrong, of course. The house and I had an understanding that no forged document could rewrite. The roses bloomed the second week of May, right on schedule, a deep coral along the back fence that I'd planted 15 years ago and nursed through 2 droughts and 1 particularly bad winter. Both of us were in the garden when it happened, the girl crouching down with her rabbit to look at the first open bloom, her face wearing the expression children have when something ordinary turns out to be extraordinary. "You were right," she said. "I usually am," I said, and she laughed at that, and the sound of it carried all the way to the back fence.